Grant's been an incredible supporter of the Business Summit. As one of our partners on the advisory team, and we've asked him to come back to do sort of an update, a reprise of where they've gone. Because often what happens is people come to Business Summit and you never see them again. And people think, did they stop using Esri, or they've just it's all become secret? So you're doing some pretty amazing things. You want to show us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Helen. So guys, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be back and share with you guys a little bit more of Regions' spatial journey. A couple years back, the guys who were here, you'll remember that I brought you up to speed on how that Regions had started from nothing. And by starting from nothing, we had a unique perspective where we could jump into the Esri platform. We did that by partnering with Esri, getting an ELA. We jumped in, did a bunch of jump starts, and came away with a pretty cool platform where we were able to, with a small shop, insert ourselves into multiple facets of Regions' business. And so today, I'm going to get to share a story with you of how a little less than a year ago, we were able to use the platform to do something that was pretty actionable for the bank, and something I hope that will resonate with you guys. So breaking all conference norms, we're actually going to do sort of a live demo here. So guys, bear with me, say your prayers, send your positive vibes. Here we go. So a little less than a year ago, while most of us were focused on the 2016 Rio Olympics or the impending presidential election, a no-name storm was forming over southern Louisiana. A no-name storm that, for all intents and purposes, ended up being a second and third page news story. You may not have heard about this. If you guys didn't live in the Southeast, there's a chance it was later in that week when you heard that something was going on. This no-name storm would eventually, over the course of about 5 days, dump 7.1 trillion gallons of water on southern Louisiana and end up being responsible for a little more than a dozen deaths. At a bank, we treat disasters a lot like you guys do. If you're not a bank, you may be worried about your retail locations. We're worried about those as well. So, you know, our branches are the retail locations for the bank, right? So we're worried about disaster impact to our physical footprint, to our associates. We're also concerned about from the risk management and the classic insurance use case of exposure. So for you guys who aren't familiar with exposure, when I talk about exposure, we're going to talk about the amount of our portfolio that could be lost to some event. In this case, it's going to be catastrophe or a weather event. So this is our mortgage portfolio in the South Louisiana area. And then we're also going to look at, there's our commercial portfolio. So you can see that sort of approaching it from both ways. So as you guys are listening, I want you to sort of think about it in that way, right? Think about how this should be very similar to what you guys are dealing with. So during that event, the task that came down from on high was a twofold task. One is, what is the bank's potential exposure? AKA, how much money could we possibly lose in this? And then coupled up with, what does that mean to our customers? We get asked about bank GIS and how you do things and where that balance is between making money and providing shareholder value and taking care of the customer. I think this is a cool story where we did both. We were able to quickly ascertain what it meant to the bank and at the same time provide real support to our customers in what for them was their actual time of need. So there's a problem with that though, right? Is that, I don't know about you guys, but I'm from an area of the country where weather plays into our life. Severe weather in particular, it's just a fact of life for us. If you haven't been impacted by severe weather, and that could be flooding, fire, tornadoes, hurricanes, tropical storms. If you haven't personally, you know someone who has. Show of hands in the room, who was affected by Katrina? Any of you Katrina guys in here? See, so you guys remember. How about Sandy, Hurricane Sandy? There's some of you guys in here too. So during those events, it's really emotional. Weather, it turns out, is really personal. So we're talking about people being displaced from their homes, possessions being lost. I find that in those situations, it can be difficult to make good decisions quickly. So our problem was, as we turned to that area of our business, we asked, how bad was it? And what we were getting back was, it's terrible. Everything is underwater. Now, I understand it's emotional, but we needed a way to transcend the emotion and narrow down those numbers. And so, like most folks, an easy way to start is you go to FEMA, right? FEMA declares counties as being disaster areas. But if any of you guys have ever done that, you know that's a really big net. And so using our mortgage portfolio as an example here, that's what that would look like for us if we just used FEMA parishes. So summed up our total portfolio for mortgage in those parishes, and we're looking at like $245 million. That's a really hard number to swallow for executives. The other portfolios I'm not showing you were a lot more than that, and that's a hard thing to wrap your hands around. So we were, from the exposure side of the world, we were presented with the task of, we've got to find a way to narrow that down. We've got to find other data feeds, other data sources to bring that down to something more like what's in reality. We turned to some of our existing data feeds, things you guys are probably using, like AccuWeather storm feeds. It was awesome. We have storm reports coming in that were verified and validated by EMA, police officers, firefighters, that, hey, there is damage in this area. The problem is there just wasn't a lot of it at the time. So we're trying to get answers during the event. We didn't want to wait for 3 weeks down the road to do an exercise after the fact. We were trying to narrow it down real time. We also looked at our insurance vendor. So we have an insurance company that insures our loans, our mortgage portfolio and whatnot, and they were getting calls in, and we overlaid that. It gave us some spatial awareness, but it still wasn't quite enough. So to further refine it, we turned to one of, at the time, was probably our newest business partner, a company called OneQ out of Atlanta, that is a mobile survey company. So through your mobile device, that could be a smartphone or just a regular cell phone, they push out surveys to verified users, and they pay you for it. So you can download that on your phone, you get whatever, $1 or 50 cents an answer. But we were able to push out surveys to I think we pushed it out to about 3,000 verified users that were within those parishes, of which we got back 1,500 responses. So by using those responses, which were geocoded and then for us rolled up to the zip code level, we were able to ask them, on a scale of 1 to 5, how affected were you by the flooding? We got those back within hours, which we then used to develop what you see on the screen here, which is an average survey score by zip code. Now you see that those, what were 12 FEMA parishes now, you can see what's happening here. It's not all underwater. There's a lot of it that is high levels of damage, but there's a good bit of it that's not. And so starting to narrow it down and focus it on what that means to regions. You see here the 70754 Livingston, that was one of the really, really high ones. And so we wanted to look and see, well, what does that mean to regions? What does our portfolio look like on top of these areas? So the green dots on the map represent our mortgage portfolio aggregated up through zip codes. And you can see that those really big green dots here, thankfully for us, were overlaying some areas that really weren't that affected. They were affected, but definitely not to the level of the red areas. And so we used that same surface to generate what was our potential exposure surface. So when I see this, I think of this as like worst case scenario. So if everything in those dark purple areas goes away, we're going to lose a lot of money. And for us, we narrowed that down into those zip codes and came up with a new number of $138 million. So if you remember, the original parish-based number was like $245 million. We narrowed that down to $138 million potentially, a savings of about $100 million. So question one, what does our potential exposure look like? So what I'm showing you is our mortgage portfolio. Obviously, we have other portfolios. We did this for all of them. We did it for commercial and for all of consumer, so vehicles, equity lines, all that, and also did it for mortgage. Question 2 was, well, what does that mean to our customers? We were able to use that same surface, and as the event drug on, probably about, if you guys may remember, this all started on like a Saturday, Sunday. By Monday, we were answering questions and feeding numbers to our executives. And by Tuesday or Wednesday, we started to get in calls from actual mortgage customers. And so we took that set of data from the call center and started to geocode them and lay them in on top of this surface. And what we saw was sort of a validation of what we thought initially. And that was that the majority of our customers weren't in the damaged areas. If you notice, real quick on this slide, the purple dots, those are mortgages that I own. Those are Regions mortgages. The red dots here, and you'll see there's a good bit more of those out in the damaged areas. Those are mortgages that actually some of you guys out here probably own, and we just surface. Good for me, bad for you, I guess, right? And you can see what that's doing, right? So what that's allowing us to do is starting to look at density of calls and probability of people being damaged. So on the map on the screen, the purple dots, once again, are the Regions owned mortgages, the green dots being Regions branches. And one of the cool things we're able to do is actually enrich those calls and branches with model data. So FEMA, within a couple days of the event, pushed out an interpolated flood model. We're able to take those points and enrich those with potential flood depths. So let's look at that. So now we've enriched those points, and you see that the purple dots that are really big now are people that called in that the FEMA model says, yes, these people probably got deep flood water. You'll see some of the calls in areas that didn't necessarily, according to FEMA, didn't get flood depths assigned. We can zoom in on those and stack those up against those light blue dots there, which are all the other mortgage customers. So for all the ones we did have call in, we have mortgages next door to them and across the street from them. And some of those didn't call in. So what we wanted to do is we want to be proactive, right? So I could go into this neighborhood and see that the big purple dot, that guy's affected. There's a really good chance that those neighbors between the two purple dots are also affected. So we're able to pull those dots out of the map, feed those to our call center, and have the Regions call center proactively reach out to the customer. So not only are we actually saying, hey, what is the potential impact to my customers, which was the question, we've got that list. We're also able to narrow that down and feed that to the call center, right? And so you as an affected party would get a phone call from Regions saying, hey, this is Regions Bank, were you affected? We've got these products, we've got unsecured lines of credit, we've got extended grace periods on your repayments. All trying to be a good neighbor, trying to do what's right for our customer. With that same modeling concept, we were able to look at our physical infrastructure, right? So we have that retail front too. So we're able to look and see what of our network could be potentially affected. According to FEMA, this Regions branch in Denham Springs should have received about 6 feet of water, according to the model. Any of you guys from Denham Springs or Baton Rouge may remember that branch actually got about 5 feet of water. So feel pretty good about that. The FEMA model in that case was pretty spot on. And we were able to get our hands around what that meant to our physical infrastructure. Going forward, we're going to do things like using that same branch network and enriching branches based on their propensity to flood. So doing things like reaching out to the Living Atlas and getting USA flood frequency and assigning the probability that these things are actually going to flood. You see some of the branches in New Orleans there. I can click on that and you'll see that the flooding frequency in that area is rare. We can do other things like looking at the branch network and finding the ones that have high potential to flood, and then doing things like site surveys, pushing out literature, making sure that they know disaster plans, and then going forward, monitoring other feeds coming out of the platform, right? So we've got things like stream gauges looking for floods. We've got NOAA watches and warnings. So by combining all that, making this intelligent early warning system, which we're pretty excited about. The other thing, and this is where, like, I love being here and hearing all you guys talk about all the new cool stuff coming out and how you want to use it. One of the things we're really interested in is recreating these same workflows that we did maybe through other products, recreating that in some of the newer technology like Insights. Word on the street is that Insights is so easy to use that just about anybody can do it. So, man, I'm breaking tradition here, and I'm actually going to ask for a volunteer from the audience to come up and try to recreate my workflows in Insights. Do I have? What's your name, sir? Dennis. Come on up, Dennis. So I've never met this guy, but we're going to see what he can do.
All right.
Take it away.
Is this thing on? Can you hear me? Awesome. All right, so one of the key points of Grant's story was how they were able to gradually hone their understanding of the situation. What, does this look like I was expecting this?
We've never met.
They were able to do that based off of new information that came in on the fly, and they were able to do that very quickly. And that's important because in these types of situations, being able to generate new information very quickly is important. And not just generating new information, but being able to share it with the teams that need to see it. Because a bottom line number is just a number without its context. You need the whole story. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into Insights, and we're going to take a look at how some of these workflows apply in the Insights environment. So these layers should all look very familiar. We have the same FEMA declared parishes, we've got the zip codes with the survey values, and the mortgage portfolio. So let me minimize this, and we'll go through a couple workflows. So the first thing that we saw Grant's team do was look at the aggregated portfolio value by parishes. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So we'll grab our parishes, and we're going to grab our portfolio, and we're going to aggregate it, taking into account the net book amount of those mortgages. And just like that, we now can see by parish what that exposure value would look like. Now we want that bottom line number, so we'll grab our name field, that new statistic, push it over to a table, and now we can see a sorted view that shows us the actual impact at each parish level. But the story didn't stop there, right? We got the survey values based off the zip codes. We want to be able to incorporate that. So let's go that direction. So we'll grab our surveys, and we're going to take the same portfolio and do the same thing. Do a spatial aggregation, and we'll look at the net book amount, doing the same thing. Now I really like this next view that comes up. So at the top left, we see a map that shows us survey score values, what zip codes were highly impacted. And down here, we see, okay, these are the zip codes where you have a high density of mortgages. So the question is how do these two relate? Where do we see zip codes that have both high impact and high number of portfolio items? Now there's a lot of ways that we could look at that, but one of my favorite ways is to use a scatter plot. So we can grab the count of mortgages, and we can grab that average survey score, and drag them over to a new chart with a scatter plot. So now we can visually look at, okay, which ones had high survey scores and relatively high portfolio values, and we can select those and see how they populate on the map and be able to quickly do an evaluation. But remember, we needed that bottom line number. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So if you remember, we have our aggregated portfolio values here under the sum, but we also had those survey values. Now, each survey value is associated with a percentage that goes into a model. So for example, if it's 4.5 or higher, we're gonna assume 100% damage, but if it's less than 1, we're gonna assume like 20%. So we have those. So the key is we wanna multiply that ratio by our total exposure and see what that gives us. So in this case, we're gonna look at the score percent times our net book amount and run it, giving us a new number that's an updated exposure value. So now we can grab that exposure value and look at it against our zip number and create a table, giving us a new $138 million bottom line. So the last part, one of the last parts in Grant's story was looking at customer calls. How can we use that as intelligence to further hone this understanding of the map? So let's take a look. We'll grab our owned mortgages, our mortgage calls rather, and our mortgage portfolio. Let me switch the order here. So one quick assumption might be is if a customer calls in saying they've been impacted, then their neighbors, who are our customers, would also be impacted. And we can quickly work off that assumption, excuse me, by doing a quick buffer. So let's do a 1 mile buffer around each of these calls. And now what we'll want to do is actually take a look at all of the portfolio items that fall within those buffers. So we'll run a spatial intersect or a filter. we're going to choose all of the mortgage portfolios that intersect our own buffer calls. All right, now we can go and grab our new net book amount and take a look at an updated exposure value of 28 million. So what we've shown here is really taking the concepts that Grant used in his presentation, but doing this very rapidly and very dynamically in a really, really fast and easy to use application like Insights. And this type of flexibility can be incredibly impactful during what is very often a fluid situation.
Yes. Thanks, sir. How do I switch you back? So that's pretty cool, right? So what the work that Dennis just did in Insights, I felt really good about what we did, right? We used the platform and we did it in hours instead of weeks. Dennis just recreated all that, and that was like less than 5 minutes. So I'm really excited about being able to use that going forward. Just some quick takeaways. I know we're running out of time, but weather is emotional. Data helps balance the emotion. In situations like this, having the right data and having real-time data was pretty crucial for us. Early data is better. Talking about the power of real-time data again, having those feeds and being able to ascertain what was really going on, getting past all the emotion was crucial. That allowed us to take the results and feed those to our executives very quickly. Those timely results, those equaled a seat at the table. You guys in my banking SIG last year, you'll remember that we talked about how do you get a seat at the table? How are you not just the map guy who does exercises weeks after the fact? Being able to take real data, do it in real time, will guarantee you a seat at the table. So Esri, thanks again for having me. Always a pleasure to get up here and talk to you guys. If you guys have questions, please come find me. And thanks a lot.
Stay here. Come back. Come back. I need a volunteer to answer this question. Me. So in our bit of theater here, there's actually a really, really important point that it isn't unusual now with the advances we make on the technology to completely transform the thinking. You know, the work you did over days, Dennis showed conceptually in minutes.
Yeah.
How is that changing your thinking about Esri, your role in the company? You've talked a lot about getting a seat at the table.
Right.
How does that change now?
Well, I feel like the platform, and we talked about this last time too, that the platform sets us up, I feel, as evangelists for the technology, for the analytics. But then looking at things like Insights, it's such an easy channel to get that in front of an executive. Not only can we do that analysis in Insights, we can share it through Insights. We don't have to bump that out to a million different pieces of technology to get it in front of them. And you know, we're a bank, right? We're really Excel spreadsheet and printed out PowerPoint heavy. Things like Insights and being able to push things out through web maps and do the what ifs and the drill downs. For us, that's pretty powerful.
Cool. Well, you're doing amazing things. Really appreciate it. Thank you again.